Welcome to Republican Roundtable. I'm Max Reimer. We are in the thick of campaign season. With less than 2 months to go, we are trying to have on as many of your candidates as we possibly can. With us today, a very special guest, a friend of the show, and your next governor of Minnesota, Jeff Johnson. Jeff, thank you for joining the Republican Roundtable.
I appreciate it.
We had a pretty incredible primary experience not too long ago.
Yep.
How have things changed between what you were doing in the primary and now what you're doing focusing on the general election November 6th?
Yep, so we are almost halfway through that period, the general election period. It's been just about 6 weeks since the primary, and we have 6 weeks left before the general. Frankly, it hasn't changed dramatically. I mean, the strategy in the primary was to travel as much as possible, get in front of people as much as possible, kind of a heavy focus on travel in greater Minnesota, just because you get more earned media that way, and then a real heavy focus on going to as many places in the metro and then trying to get a message out through digital and radio as possible. And the message hasn't really changed all that much. The message I used in the primary to win it was about changing the status quo. It was about fundamental change to the culture and the attitude in our state agencies. It was about letting people keep more of what they earn. That's not a real partisan message, and we are finding that people all over the state of Minnesota, whether they are Democrats or Republicans or anything in between, they're interested in that. So it's been really good.
For some of our viewers at home, who is Jeff Johnson? What is your background? What led you to run for governor after running for it in 2014? Describe yourself to us a little bit for those who might not know who you are at this point.
So I was born and raised in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. My wife Sandy is from Crookston. We went to college together in Moorhead. So I am a child of northwestern Minnesota. I spent a few years away in Chicago and DC, and now we've been in Plymouth for probably 25 years. We have 2 teenage boys. Thor is in college, Rolf is in high school. And I've actually spent most of my adult life in the private sector. Even though I've been involved in politics, I have been self-employed for almost 20 years now. And during that time of self-employment, I also served 3 terms in the House, and now I'm in my 3rd and final term on the county board, and Hennepin County Board. And I got in this race almost a year and a half ago now.
Wow.
And it was really for, a pretty straightforward set of reasons: to allow people to keep more of what they earn to spend on their own families or on their own small businesses, to make government actually accountable to people again. We have completely lost that in Minnesota the last 8 years. There is no accountability whatsoever from a lot of what's going on in state government. And then to change the culture in our state agencies, or at least some of our state agencies, from that of controlling and directing and helping us all make better decisions about our own lives, to actually serving the people who pay their salaries. And we've lost that in Minnesota too.
On the campaign trail, are you hearing any specific issues that you've been surprised by?
There are always kind of these crazy little side issues that pop up, but the only issue that has surprised me by its volume has probably been the legalization of recreational marijuana. It doesn't surprise me that it came up, but it does surprise me the number of people who talk about it. And frankly, it's people on both sides of that issue. It's not just the pro side. We're tending to hear a lot from the negative side as well, of people who now are becoming concerned about that. So otherwise, it is kind of your typical issues. Healthcare comes up more than anything else. People are scared to death about their healthcare in this state. Taxes comes up, spending comes up. People are worried about their jobs. Immigration is a big issue, and those are K-12 education, and those are the ones that always poll at the top of the list. So no big surprises there.
Let's touch on healthcare for a little bit, because I'm always interested. It is certainly an issue in a number of different ways. At the state level, as governor, what power do you have to really change the system or change that issue? Because it felt like a top-down approach where we were mandated with Obamacare. So figure it out, states. What can you do as governor to help solve the problem? I think 1, of cost transparency, and 2, of affordability.
So to make the big changes that we need to make to solve this problem, we have to work with the federal government, because what we need, unless they unless they repeal Obamacare, which doesn't look like they're going to do anytime soon, if we want to make the significant changes, we have to actually get a waiver from certain sections of Obamacare, which is one of the first things I will do, is put together that plan. Because I think we can show the federal government that Minnesota did this better than the rest of the country before the ACA, and we can do it better than the rest of the country again, and certainly better than what we're doing right now under Obamacare. It's been an absolute disaster for most people who pay for their insurance. There's more federal money coming in to allow for greater subsidies for people who need some help, and I think everybody agrees with that. The more people who can be insured, the better. But for those who pay for their insurance, which is still the vast majority of people, this has not gone well at all. And for the 15% or so in Minnesota who are in the individual market, we are bankrupting them. Yes. I mean, we are seeing increases, of 30, 40, 50% a year with deductibles going through the roof, and people, they just can't afford it. And so what we need to do, and we need a waiver to do this, but we can get it, is number one, we need to make sure we continue to take care of people with pre-existing conditions. We've done it for 40 years in Minnesota. We will always do it. It's a value we have. We actually did it better before, and I think we moved back to that system. But then, with respect to everybody else, we've got to force more competition against the insurance companies. So it means allowing small groups of people to pool their resources and form essentially their own insurance policies, whether it's a group of farmers or a group of small churches or a group of small businesses. They can't do that right now. We should allow them to do that. I think we should start rolling back some of the mandates that we've put on policies, so that if people want a little more of a flexible benefit package, government can no longer tell them you can't do that because we know better. I actually think that they probably know better. And I think we should allow people to buy insurance across state lines. I'm not convinced the federal government will ever get that done. We can do it regionally. We can work with Wisconsin and the Dakotas and Iowa and say, let's the 5 of us agree that we're gonna have a larger area where our citizens can buy across state lines within our 5 states and kind of open up the market that way.
Well, that's what we do with college tuition in many cases.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
What say you now to those who say it might just be easier to let's have a Medicare for all public option that people can just buy, or not even buy into, but just the government will cover it? I know your opponent has gone on record and said that he at least wants to have a conversation about single payer health care. Why is that the wrong solution?
Well, my opponent has not just said he wants to have a conversation. He has pledged to move Minnesota there. So that's his plan, and he's done it multiple times in writing during this campaign. It's a terrible option. It sounds great because everyone wants everyone to have insurance. Nobody wants to see anyone without insurance. But what single payer says, I mean, it is pretty straightforward. It says there is no private insurance anymore. So all of us, everyone in the state of Minnesota, loses their insurance. Whether they're paying for it themselves or it comes through their employer, it's now gone, and we're all forced into one government program. So it's the VA for everyone, but it won't even be as good as the VA, and the VA has its set of problems, right? But it won't be as good at that because now we've expanded it to such a huge level, and you can look at other countries. People with money come here because they're not getting the care they need for serious conditions. And throw on top of that the fact that the only way you can make it work financially is, number one, increase taxes. I think the estimate from a liberal group that likes single payer in Minnesota is that it would require a $17 billion tax increase each year. Right now, our entire budget is $24 billion a year.
Imagine that.
So you're talking about thousands of dollars, many thousands of dollars per person. And the other piece is the only way they can make it work is to have cut rate reimbursement rates for hospitals and doctors. And in greater Minnesota, that means a lot of them are just going to go out of business. They won't be able to do it. So it would be just disastrous, and it's the opposite direction we need to move. We need to give people more control over their health care, not take it completely away from them and give it to bureaucrats.
You had made mention, and you've made mention in the primary and in the general election, state agencies reining in some cases incompetent, and you have used the word arrogant state agencies. And we talked a little bit about that when you were running for the primary, Jeff, but I'm curious as to what agencies are there that have expanded their scope of work to a point where they need to be reduced?
Yeah.
And then two, where does that word arrogant, where does that come from? What have you observed to put that out there?
I'm trying to decide where to start.
Okay.
I will start with the DNR. And so many sportsmen and sportswomen that I talk to are so frustrated with the DNR because they see an arrogance there. The DNR is making really important decisions about the deer herd, for example, or fisheries. Lake Mille Lacs would be the best example of that, but it's not the only example, that really affect people. They affect hunters, they affect anglers, they affect businesses around Lake Mille Lacs, for example, and they're frankly going out of business because of their decisions. And they make those decisions despite what the citizens think should be done, and then when the question arises, how did you come to that decision? Because we don't agree with it. The answer is, well, it's based on science, but we're not going to share that with you. That's arrogance, in my opinion. That's not government serving people. And it doesn't mean that the DNR is always going to make decisions that everybody agrees with. Of course they're not. But let's at least include actual people in your decision making. Right. And then once you make a decision, you better be able to explain it and you better be transparent about it. Department of Human Services, another great example. I cannot tell you how many child care providers, particularly in greater Minnesota, in most cases, younger or middle-aged women who are trying to make a business work and provide a desperately needed service in greater Minnesota, they are being literally run out of business, regulated out of business by DHS. That's arrogance. The MPCA with farmers.
Yes.
They sometimes have to enforce regulations that not every farmer loves. That's the reality of life. It works that way.
Right.
But the way they're doing it now with particularly buffer strips, where farmers weren't even included in the decision making about how to protect water, because they've got some idea, they care about their water quality in greater Minnesota too. And the fact that we're just saying we're going to decide it up here and then we're going to force it down on you and we're literally going to take your property and not give you any compensation for it, that's arrogance.
Yeah.
Met Council. I don't need to go any further than that, but there's another great example too.
Right. It was interesting observing the primary victory, and I think anybody outside of the campaign believed in you, wasn't sure how that was going to go for you. I'm interested, Jeff, what lessons did you take away from that primary? Being very heated, there's a lot of money spent, you were outspent, you're going to be outspent again. What things do you take away from that race to bring into this next? Well, we're already in the thick of it, but this next leg of the race.
And so I take a couple of really encouraging things away from that. Number one, it's not all about money. Money matters, and we actually won't be outspent. I will spend as much or possibly more than Walls because he's spent so much already compared to what we have, and we have spending limits.
Okay.
The outside money, that's a little bit tougher. I'm already getting pummeled on TV with a false ad about healthcare, and we'll probably get outspent by the outside groups, but it is what it is. But what that primary showed was it's not all about money. While money matters, we were outspent, I think, 5 or 6 to 1.
Right.
And won by 9 points. So that is very encouraging to me. The other piece that is encouraging is hard work and a message that actually resonates with people makes all the difference in the world. And that's what we did in the primary. We worked harder. And we had a message that was not just, I can win, it is, here's what I'm going to do to make your lives better. Right. And that's going to win it in the general as well, that message of we are going to change things and make things better in Minnesota for you personally because you get to keep more of what you earn and there's going to be, your health care isn't going to cost nearly as much and we are going to make government accountable again. I think that's what I learned in the primary, and that makes me feel real good because that's a good sign for November.
I actually feel bad for your opponent in certain ways. It's good for us, but it seems to me that he has veered so far left in some of his proposals or what he's even comfortable with on a normal day if he wasn't running for governor. Because the climate in this state has become so polarized, left versus right versus really far left. We have some activists in this congressional district and a couple of other congressional districts that have basically gone crazy. And I'm fascinated because there's this dichotomy of your opponent and then you just get to tell the truth. As you made mention earlier, you don't need to change your message at all, quite frankly, to try to resonate with most of Minnesota. I'm curious, Jeff, how do you view Minnesota as a political climate? What kind of things do you observe on the campaign trail that either give you hope or make you question what you're doing? Because it seems to me that everyone's guessing at this point.
Yeah, it's so unpredictable right now. Obviously we see that at the national level. If anybody who tries to suggest they can predict how including polls are worthless. I mean, the polls in the primary said I was down 20 points, like 3 or 4 days before the election. I won by 9. So I totally ignore polls because people either they don't answer or they don't answer honestly or they have fun with it. So it's unpredictable. But what I could say about politics and Minnesotans, what I've learned is that Minnesotans are extremely common sense. And I think they are. I think every year they move a little bit further away from traditional party labels. It's still there for some, but I think more and more people are willing to set aside the party label and say, who's making the most sense here? Who is actually going to, number one, who has policies that are actually going to make my life better and make Minnesota better? And number two, who do we believe is actually going to do it and who's just, blowing smoke? And I think that's a big advantage for me in this election because Tim Walz, my DFL opponent, he's promising everything to everyone. We've started to compile all of the promises he's made over the last year, and we're at close to $20 billion in promises and in a $24 billion budget.
That's an increase.
As an increase on top of what's already there, which obviously would be ridiculous from a tax perspective. And I tend to just tell people what I really think, and sometimes it's not what they want to hear because I don't believe you should promise things if you don't know that you can keep those promises. That's common sense, and I think that is what I'm seeing around the state. People are willing to pay taxes in this state. Nobody wants to be Mississippi.
Right.
They'd move to Mississippi. But they also don't really want to be the third or fourth or second highest tax state in the country. And what they do pay, they want to see spent wisely. They want to see it, if it's supposed to help people, then show me that it's actually helping people rather than creating a dependency that's maybe not good for people.
Right.
Or show me that, we're not wasting hundreds of millions of dollars on something like MNsure or MNLARS and then no one's held accountable.
Right.
I just see a lot of common sense, and that gives me hope for the election.
Yeah, talking about polls, obviously we don't need to pay attention to them, but this last one that I did see, it was just funny to even look at it because it had you down seven points. You're pretty accustomed to polls telling you those things.
Yes, I am.
But all the issues, Jeff.
Yes.
You were ahead by 20 points across the board with every issue. I think, do you take that at least as a little bit of a sign that your issues resonate with the majority of Minnesotans?
And I think issue polling is different from who's going to win the election polling. I mean, we see time and time and time again that these polls about who's ahead just are wrong about half the time, so they're of no value. However, the issue polling I think is a little bit different because that tends to be a bit more accurate. I think people tend to be a bit more honest about that, and they, you've got your strong feeling about an issue, but maybe you haven't really decided on which candidate falls where. And what we're seeing from the polling that is out there is that the positions that my opponent has taken on the most important issues are really out of step with Minnesota. On taxes, he has promised to raise the gas tax 35% as a starting point, he says. That's not popular with Minnesotans.
Right.
We actually believe we're already overtaxed. On immigration, he has said we should be a sanctuary state, which is on the far fringe of even the DFL party, and it's people just don't want to go there. On healthcare, this idea that we should have a complete government takeover, people want to make sure others have insurance, but they don't want to lose their own insurance and be put under a government plan. I can't think of anybody who has private sector insurance who wants to make that move. So guns, just right on down the list, there are a bunch of issues like that. A work requirement, he's just out of step with the common sense that I see in Minnesota. And so my job is to make sure people know where I want to take the state and where Walz wants to take the state, because the media, the mainstream media, won't tell them that, and so I have to.
You had a debate this morning on workforce development and some alternative routes to maybe a traditional 4-year college degree. It seems that a lot of people talk rhetorically about that. We talk like, hey, it's a good thing to maybe go into the trades, but I want my kids to go to a 4-year school. I'm interested, Jeff, how do we start to shift that focus in Minnesota? Because you've talked to them, I've talked to them, contractors, more blue-collar jobs, we're having a hard time even filling those positions in Minnesota.
That is an understatement. I mean, it is the number one problem for small employers, and actually probably large employers too, but especially small businesses in this state. They cannot find workers. They simply cannot find workers. I've talked to so many employers who say, we would expand, we can create more jobs, we have the work for it, we just don't have the people to fill those jobs. And part of that is that it is hard to find people with the right, in many cases, technical skills, or people who are able to work with their hands, electricians and plumbers. That is a cultural thing in the state of Minnesota. There is still a belief, particularly in the Twin Cities, that if a kid doesn't go to a 4-year college, he or she is just not that successful. And I tell people all the time, this is personal for me. We've got a senior in high school, and he's looking at colleges, but he's also has in the back of his mind a couple of other options. And if he chooses those other options, I'm going to be really proud of him because they'd be good options for him. But I know people in our neighborhood who will kind of feel sorry for me as a dad, and that just makes me sad. And so a governor, I think, there are some policy things you can do to make sure that business and schools are working together, but that is more about using the bully pulpit to make sure that Minnesotans, especially parents, understand the amazing opportunities that are out there for these kids who want to go get a technical degree or go into an internship program, for example, or apprenticeship program, for example, and after 2 years, they're going to move into a job with little or no debt, be making a really good living just immediately, and will have their choice of jobs anywhere in the state of Minnesota for the rest of their lives, as opposed to being, $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 in debt and not being able to find anything and having to live in the basement with the parents' house. So I just think that is about, you just constantly talk about it and celebrate that and do events at some of these schools that are offering these programs so that Minnesotans know about them.
Staying on education, but kind of backing it up, we had a report that came out 2 months ago. The achievement gap in Minnesota has just, quite frankly, never been as bad as it is right now. You've talked a lot about that on the campaign trail. I'm interested, Jeff, as governor, specifically as governor, how do you address that? Because it seems to be a hot button issue. You have one side that says, hey, school choice, and that would be relatively, I think, where we fall or our audience falls. And then, again, listening to your opponent this morning, it's very clear that he believes that our schools and everything else is underfunded. How do you address that as governor?
Well, it is the only answer we get from the left. More money for everything, but especially more money for schools. And if that were the answer, we'd be in pretty good shape in Minneapolis, because per student, they're spending, I think, almost double what a lot of suburban school districts are spending. And the results in many, not all, but in many of their schools are just dismal. And if you look at what that's doing to actual kids, I'm not talking about the school, I'm talking about what's happening to these kids. We're failing them miserably, and we've had one of the worst education achievement gaps in the country for like 40 years.
Right. And it's been that dramatic.
Yes.
That's not, those aren't fluffy numbers.
No, not at all. And we've been wringing our hands about it and saying how horrible it is and throwing money at it, and we haven't changed anything. And the answer from the other side is, well, let's just do some more of that and see if we get anything different. And we just keep failing these kids. So to me, I think choice is a part of it, but I don't think that's nearly all of it. I think it is about empowering parents and empowering teachers, because every study I've ever seen that looks at how to predict whether a kid is successful in school says first you look at the parents, and second you look at their teachers. And then there are some other things, but they're way back. And if those two things are working, your kid's probably going to succeed. So there's not a lot government can do about parents to make them good parents. Some are great parents and others aren't. But what we can do for the parents who are good and who actually want something different for their kid, let's give them the power to do that. Whether it is by saying you have choice, so we're going to actually let you take the part of the money that you were paying in taxes to go to this school, and you can use it somewhere else. I talked to so many, even out at the fair, I talked to a bunch of mostly single moms from Minneapolis, especially North Minneapolis, who said, I want to send my little boy or little girl to a school that I think is safe.
Right.
And I can't
Imagine
afford
that.
it. I can't afford to give him or her anything better. That's really sad to me that we're not allowing them to do that.
Yeah.
The other piece, though, is let them actually give them some power to change the school their kid's already in, so that most parents probably would prefer not to take their kid out of North Minneapolis and send them out to Hopkins every day to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
They'd rather let them stay in the neighborhood. But they feel powerless in the schools that their kid is at. And I talk about the parent trigger a lot, and I won't go into detail, but several states have tried this, mostly more liberal states, California, New Jersey, that actually empowers parents to change the school that their kids are in if that school is failing them. And I think we try it. And you know what? If it doesn't work, then let's try something else. But we cannot just keep failing these kids the way we have been. And just once again, every single year when these terrible numbers come out, saying, "Oh, look at how bad that is. We got to do something about that. Enough of that."
Right. It's just talk.
It is. It's just talk.
Jeff, with the last minute and a half here, this might be the first time some people are seeing you. We're on cable access, which is an immensely popular form of media. I say that tongue in cheek, but this might be the first time. It might be the last time that people see you before they cast their vote in November. Why should people vote for Jeff Johnson?
If you are looking for three things, I always go back to three things. And if you're looking for these three things, then I am your candidate. If you want to keep more of what you earn to spend on your own family, or if you're a small business owner to spend on your own business, or if you are looking for some accountability in your state government, so that when things like MNLARS, first of all, things like MNLARS and MNsure don't happen, but if they do, someone's actually held accountable and we fix them rather than continuing to pump more money in and never fixing them. Or if you are looking for a change in the attitude of our state agencies, the DNR, the Department of Human Services, the Met Council, so that they understand that their job is to serve us rather than control us and direct us, then I am your guy, because that is what I will wake up every single day to do as governor. And I would just ask people to take a close look at the website, johnsonforgovernor.org. You can send us a message there. I actually get them and we respond to them, and would love their support.
Very good. Commissioner Jeff Johnson, our next governor of Minnesota, thank you so much
Thanks,
for
Max.
joining the Republican Roundtable.
Appreciate it.
This has been the Republican Roundtable. I'm Max Reimer. Until next time.